We're going to go through a summary of bridge history. We're going to be following on with Paul Copeland's Engineering Studies, The Definitive Guide, Volume 2, 3rd edition, and we're on page 10. Okay, so I'm going to start with the summary. And the summary gives us a good overview. We've just done a very quick look through some PowerPoint slides, which will be also attached to this video as a separate video. But what we start with is about 10,000 years ago, we start seeing the first primitive beam and suspension bridges. So these are beams where we have a log that has fallen down to cross a river, or we see suspension bridges made out of chains, or not chains, out of vines or primitive rope. Okay, so the Greeks start building beam bridges that can take chariots and other horse-drawn carts, that sort of stuff. And then the Romans start building superior arch bridges. So that brings me to my first picture that we're going to look at, which is, we've got here some Roman arches. So this is Pont Julien, which is the Julian Bridge. It's in France. But there's quite a few others. The idea of stone arch bridges, we're going to go into a little bit more detail later, but is that they maximize the fact that stone is only good in compression. It is no good at all in tension. So that's what the advantage there. So we're going to keep going. We're going to have a look at Roman engineers. Okay, so the fall of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire sort of lost its stability. I wouldn't say... I'm not a history teacher, so I'm going to move on to... The bridges got worse, right? So we have, for instance, the London Bridge. So if I go to... This is London Bridge... There have been lots of London bridges, but even if we look at this old London Bridge, we can see that it's more difficult for boats to get through these narrow arches. So that's a concern of these were less efficient than previous Roman arches because they didn't have the same technologies. But if we keep going, eventually we get to the Renaissance, and I don't think I looked this one up, which is called the... Okay, so the famous bridge of the Renaissance is the Rialto Bridge, which is in Venice, which was the first return to long spans. There are other famous bridges of this era, which is, for instance, Pont Neuf, which confusingly, a lot of people think it's the ninth bridge, whereas it means the new bridge. Whereas ironically, in France, if you go there, Pont Neuf is the oldest bridge. Why is it the oldest bridge?
Because it was the first new bridge.
Because all the other bridges have now burnt down or collapsed. So this was the first bridge which was going back to stone arches. So that it's the oldest bridge that's still standing, but it was the new bridge at the time and the name is sort of stuck. It's a shame that Wikipedia always has not very good pictures. There's some amazing pictures of Pont Neuf, but I'm not going to bother looking for them. Okay, so going back to Renaissance. Okay, so then we have James Finlay. He came up with the modern suspension bridge. So we have some old suspension bridges. I will find you some old suspension bridges. I had these open because I want to remind you that. So London Bridge. So the song that is the London Bridge that got bought and it now is in Arizona, which is now the story goes that they bought this bridge thinking that they were getting Tower Bridge, the very famous London landmark, which has what do they call those bridges that rise? It's suspension. No, I can't think of the word at the moment. Anyway, it's. Yeah, anyway, I'm having a blank and I'm going to move on because the longer I talk about... Okay, I was looking... This is what we're getting to, but I wanted to find... Well, we're going to look ahead. We'll find them sooner or later. Okay, so... what gets us to suspension bridges. So... Let's find the other one. Sorry. Oh, here we go. So these bridges are really old, right? So these were at a point in time the longest bridges in the world. These Tibetan chain bridges were incredibly long bridges in the Himalayas. But eventually we have Finlay, and he is the first one to use these in the Western world. So he uses suspension bridges, and that is Finlay's modern suspension bridge. Long spans, little little impediment to water traffic. Okay, we get to the bowstring girder. So that's next. The bowstring or tied arch bridge. So we're going to talk about the benefits of these, but the longest arch bridge in the world is in China, and that is this. I'd have to look at yeah, that's close enough. Chao Tianmian, something like that. Bridge. And so that they're examples of bowstring or tied arch bridges. Okay, so next we have box girders. So box girders were developed after as a result of World War II, and so we got box girder bridges. So this is we still see these around, box girder bridges, but so the development of them they can be made out of a variety of materials, but typically they're made of concrete. Then we have the Brooklyn Bridge. The first suspension bridge to use steel cables improves safety. So Brooklyn Bridge is pretty famous. It's a pedestrian bridge. You can't drive a car over it, but people do walk over it as it's a sort of a landmark. I think that maybe trains run over it. But I know there's no cars on it. Yeah, it's always important when you're going to be wrong on the internet. But if I'm wrong on the internet, Okay. So then we're going to go to the Brooklyn Bridge. Then we have concrete used as a material for arch bridges. So the first box girders, you can have steel box girder bridges, but these days they're more likely to be concrete. We have the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which is important in Australia as a significant bridge. So it is a combination of an arch and trusses. It's also significant culturally in Australia because it was built during the Great Depression, so it has a significant role there. It also is significant for the growth of Sydney, so the development of Sydney's, which is true of pretty much all bridges, that a bridge will affect the social development of the city. But so, like, while I talk about that, I'll quickly talk about the Charles Bridge in Prague, which is a famous bridge. If you ever go to Prague, everyone walks over the Charles Bridge. Again, I'm sure that photo is probably nicer than the one on Wikipedia. We'll open that one as well. So, the Charles Bridge was built because it's got statues on it. The Charles Bridge was built because they want the emperor. I can't remember which Charles. I'm going to go with Charles V, but could well be wrong. He was concerned that if there was a fire, that it would destroy all of Prague. So by building a bridge, they could, at least if there was a fire, only one half of the bridge would burn down. A lot of cities can really mark their growth. So, for instance, like Budapest is used to be two cities, Buda and Pest. And that when eventually the bridges got big enough that there could be trade between the two sides of the river, of either side of the Danube, I'm pretty sure it's the Danube, that the city grew into one city. So that's pretty common. Okay, so that's Sydney Harbour Bridge. We've got the Tacoma Narrows bridge disaster. So that bridge was not considered to be serviceable. So when I first started learning about structures, so this is when I did a civil engineering diploma. I remember the lecturer talking about what are the two things we need to design for. We need to design for strength and serviceability. And so serviceability means that the thing doesn't deflect too much. Now this is considered to be too much deflection. Yeah, that when you walk over a bridge, I remember when I lived in Lyon, there was a pedestrian bridge, and that when you walked over it, you could feel the deflection. Now, the bridge was strong enough, but the problem is that it doesn't matter if the bridge is strong enough. What matters is that people feel confident that it's people have confidence that it's going to be safe. This bridge, the problem is also, in this case, that you can have harmonic notion. Eventually, you can get to the point where the bridge starts to wobble back and forth to a point where it starts messing everything up. Now, I don't really go into harmonic notion and resonant frequencies where that can be a problem. That's more a mechanical engineer problem. But yeah, this bridge failed not because it wasn't strong enough, but because it couldn't take the deflections. And when because it was such a long span and it didn't have enough support in the cables, it was able to sway to such an extent that it destroyed itself. Okay, we'll come back and talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. So we have the Severn suspension bridge. So the Severn River, I think, is near Bristol. It's in I think it's in Bristol. Okay, so that was a big bridge. It's important. That's a suspension bridge, but that was a significant suspension bridge, which was then eventually outshined by the one in San Francisco. The longest suspension bridge in the world at the moment is the Akashi Koko bridge, which is I think that just means straight. So the Akashi Straight Bridge, and that joins, I think, Kobe and. Okay, so yeah, there we go. That's where it joins. Okay, so that's the summary. So what we're going to do is in the next video we'll start going through parts, each of these parts, and talking about those and why they're significant. So.